Good evening and welcome to Friday Fables for Storytelling with Book 2022. We will, as always, start with a story.
I still don't really know why I did it. Forgive me, as my memory might not be precise, but I will do my best. We were playing tag. "You're it!" we would scream as we tapped our friend on the shoulder. It was quite exciting being in the first year of junior school. That year, free to some, others have different names, but we were all between the ages of 7 and 8. It was for our protection, but we always felt like it was a bit of a punishment that we had our own playground, away from the year 4, 5 and 6 kids. They were allowed to play football, albeit with a tennis ball, and they seemed to have so much free reign. Still, it didn't really bother us much. We had tag, racing, and stickers to swap. We even had pogs. Remember them? One of the strange things about having our own playground was that to get to the dinner hall at lunchtime, we had to pass by the big kids. There was no wall or any type of barrier between us and them. Just a line on the ground to signify a border. We wouldn't dare break the rules, so there was no need for anything else. Therefore, lunchtime was the only time that we got to see the full scale of what these 8 to 11-year-olds had. We would queue up at the line on the ground, 4 rows based on our house or class grouping, whatever you want to call it, with a teacher blowing a whistle to make sure we were all present, before meandering through to our pizza, chips and beans, shepherd's pie and beans, spaghetti bolognese and beans, or something else with beans lunch. Believe it or not, I still really like beans. Once dinner was over, it was back to the classroom for the afternoon lessons, where registration would be taken. Waiting for our turn to make it to the dinner hall one specific day, I made a decision. I was standing at the back of the queue, and my friends were towards the front. We were the last group to go in, and the teachers were leading the line. As we passed by the big playground, I kept walking. I didn't turn with everyone else, I just kept going. I followed the path around the edge of the building to the front of the school and the road where Mum used to pick me up. I turned left, walked all the way to the main road and kept going. I didn't look back, not once. As I walked, I was very careful to wait when the man was red. I knew I could do that properly. I just did. I could smell the bread from my favourite bakery, but I didn't look in. I walked and I walked and I walked until about 30 minutes later, I made it home. I don't know why I went home. There were thousands of places I could have run away to, but then again, I don't think I thought I was running away. I think I thought I was showing that I could be an adult by doing something extremely childish. I think I thought that it was unfair that I wasn't allowed to go to the bakery by myself. I think I thought it was ridiculous for anyone else to think that I couldn't cross a road by myself. I think I might not have really been thinking. My brother certainly didn't understand what I was thinking. Luckily, he was home when I rang the bell. He's 10 years older than me and he had some legitimately free time. After questioning me and explaining to me endlessly how much trouble I would be in, he drove me back to school. When I got there, it was like nothing had ever happened. My teacher just got on with the lesson and the other kids behaved perfectly normally. I wondered if they'd even noticed. My mum's angry, worried, loving hug when she picked me up told me that they did. Later, I found out that they were told not to make a fuss as the teachers thought something might be really wrong. It wasn't. I just didn't think about what I was doing. Mum said, "Never do that again." And I didn't. Welcome everybody to Friday Fables. Please feel free to turn on your cameras and your unmute yourselves.
Hi Gary, hi Garima.
Hello.
It's a quiet one tonight. How's it going?
All right. I was glad to make it. I've not been able to take part really in this one this year.
Yeah, well, you've been busy from what I've what I've heard. How's everything going with being Gary Nightingale creative?
Yeah, it's good. I've got a big deadline I have to hit next week, or in time for half term the following week, because it's stuff that they're going to show to teachers. So it's making videos. So that's pretty good. I mean, this time last year I wasn't making video. I wasn't Gary Nightingale creative.
But you were very creative, even though it wasn't.
Yeah, how about you? I know we've been. Sorry, you. What's that? Sorry, you broke up a bit.
Oh, I was saying you were very creative last year, even though it wasn't in your title. You gave us almost a novel of your life.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think I was still business illustration then, and it just became increasingly restrictive because I was doing more and more other stuff. So now it just means that whatever I decide to put on LinkedIn, I can just say that it's being creative, so it's business related.
So if somebody says one of the old cliched "this isn't Facebook" comments, you can say, but it doesn't matter because I'm a creative and
I know,
anything
but
I do.
No one ever does. I got trolled once. That's it.
No one ever does to me either. Sometimes I wonder about whether or not this is all a scheme cooked up with people to get more engagement.
I know. I was called an arrogant asshat.
Oh.
Hello,
How
Gary.
did you take that?
I made a post out of it.
You did something creative with it. Excellent.
Yeah. So it's good to see you both, and I know we've been messaging a bit. Stuff I know.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to see you too. And Aliva and Garima, welcome. It's definitely going to be a bit of a quieter session this evening, but that's all good. It means that we can all share a few more stories between ourselves and then go off and have a Friday drink. How are you guys? How's Garima? How's Aliva?
Yeah, I just arrived home. It was a really tough trip with the train today, and I was actually planning to arrive on time, but the train didn't want it to. Both trains, and I usually get at this time, they're delayed. So
that's a pain.
I'm alive.
How's Garima?
Yeah, fine. I've been a bit busy for the past few days, and that's why I was not able to attend all your sessions, So today, luckily, I'm a bit free, so.
That's completely understandable. It's interesting, actually. Gary and I were talking on the LinkedIn Messenger the other day about how this year is very different to last year. Partly, I imagine because of we've been a bit busier and haven't advertised storytelling with Puck quite as much. But also, I think partly because everyone's got a lot more going on again now, and everyone has to, actually leave the house and commute, and which we didn't have to do last year to get anywhere, and have in-person meetings and all of that kind of stuff.
True.
It really hit a nerve last year, didn't it? I've seen this. There's been quite a lot of involvement this year, but it just has a not any better or worse, I don't mean, but just different, like a different feel to it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think last year we had a few people who, like yourself, I think, who really broke out into wanting to write for the first time and kind of publish it for the first time and put it out there. And this year we've had amazing stories, but we maybe haven't had that same kind of idea of people publishing for the first time. And again, I think the environment people were in and all of that kind of stuff probably made a difference. But I still, the stories that have come in have still all been absolutely brilliant. So I'm still I'm very happy with the way it's going. But it's just a bit quieter and a bit smaller this year, I think. However, saying that, we still have lots and lots of stories. Now, I know that you guys, I haven't seen one from you, Gary, but I know you were working on something. I know Garima and
I posted a poem. I don't know if you saw it.
I did. I tell you what, though, some people haven't seen it, so maybe you could read it for us. Would you mind, Garima?
Okay. I just posted it, like you can say, an hour ago. You know, this is something which I had been wanting to write. Actually, is about my field. So it may sound a bit weird. Yeah, okay. It starts as, I am a cell. How much dangerous I can be, no one can tell, and no one can defeat me. I can create, nurture, and destroy. No other living being has this power. For millennia, they have been my toy, while I have the greatest turnover. From the plant to animal, I exist in everything. From me they rise and fall, health and sickness I bring. I am a cell. That's it.
I really like it. It's brilliant. So why don't you tell? Because I don't know if everyone knows your background. So you mentioned that you got this idea from what you do and your
Yeah,
where you come from.
I studied biomedical science.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, it's just about studying disease-causing microorganisms and about how they affect our health and how the diseases can be treated. So basically, that's just it. But it's complicated.
It's like you don't have to tell us all of the science.
Yeah.
But now you've changed your career and you've moved into writing and created that lovely poem off the combination. I read something the other day, one of the Storytelling with Puck posts actually from Tracy, and she was talking about the idea of a career not being linear, but I can't remember the word she used. It was much more poetic than this. But the lines that we follow through our career mean that everything affects everything else, which I think to be true as well. I've done a lot of different things in my career personally, which some are more closely related than others, but I think everything has influenced what I do now. How about the rest of you? What are your thoughts on that?
I liked that post. I know the one you mean. That was one of the first thing I saw in this event. I think I saw your comment on it actually, so I thought that made me wonder, and then go to the original blog post. It was interesting, and it was an interesting sort of reflection. It was like personal, but it was also a reflection of just like a bigger sort of cultural change, I suppose, that it's more common now than it was, say, generation or a couple of generations ago, when it was perhaps accepted that you would train and then do a job and then retire. It was interesting.
Yeah, I'm personally following another career change now. I've studied fashion for about 5 years, and including I went to England also to follow a year exchange program. And then I went back to Brazil, and for those who don't know, I'm originally from Brazil. And when I moved to the Netherlands, I had to start over. It was not easy starting over with fashion, because fashion requires, connections, and I didn't have those connections inside the fashion world. And to me, it was like really difficult. I've tried, but then I decided to go further with online marketing, and I just completed a course, and now I'm just going to this career change, to this new path. And writing has helped me quite a lot with that, because I really want to work with content marketing. So really discovered this new passion. And yeah, I used to write quite a lot when I was a kid, and then I kind of lost it. And then now I'm getting it back. It's really funny how it goes. So
yeah.
And how does what you learned when you were studying fashion, how does that transfer or help you in what you're doing now in content marketing?
The graphics, absolutely everything that has to do with graphics and design, but also be more open-minded, I think. When I studied fashion, most people ask, yeah, did you do like a short course? Did you go to an academy? Because in Brazil, I went to university for fashion. It's not really common to go to university for fashion in other countries, here, for example. And the fashion course I followed in Brazil was really extensive. People who went to study fashion, they thought, oh, mostly drawing, and I don't know, maybe I'll be featured in a catwalk and be famous. But it was much more than that. It was really deeper than that. We had a lot of theory to study. We read a lot. We wrote a lot. So I was really amazed. Flabbergasted. That's okay. So that's how it is to study fashion, to dig deep in it. And there are so many possibilities to go for you don't really have to be a designer. I, for example, had a lot of classmates who went further with another career path, not necessarily in fashion, but fashion kind of helped them to figure out which kind of career they wanted to follow. We studied a lot of history, and I kind of found my true passion for history when I was in fashion. It's actually where I kind of learned history in a deeper level and could understand it more, because at school, at high school, I was like, okay, we had this bunch of facts, but I don't know how to put them together. And in fashion, fashion kind of brought it back to me in a more concise way. So it was kind of sort of storytelling there. We had those books, and then we could relate all the clothing, all the meaning behind all that clothing to the historical time they were inserted in, and it was really interesting. So it was really insightful. And I guess it kind of inspired me to go further into marketing, into writing. So it's quite a lot to bring in profession. And when I was in England, I mostly studied textiles. I was not really digging deeper in history studies, but it was mostly practical.
Okay.
So
that's brilliant. I really enjoy the idea as well of how you were able to learn more through having something tangible to work with, and also the idea of stories as well. I know that's what we're here for, to show how stories help with everything in the world. But genuinely, I really like the idea that actually, I think lots of people have gone through this. Learning history can be really hard when you have a bad teacher who doesn't teach you in a way that's actually interesting. And often some people do find this interesting, but I for me, when it's fact after fact after fact after fact, basically just pushed down your throat and timelines after timelines, I fall asleep. I can't keep up with it. But when you can integrate facts into a story, especially a story that you're really interested in, like for you in the fashion world, then suddenly it's like, that happened. Wow, why did that happen? How did that link to that? And then suddenly it starts becoming exciting, and I think you absorb a lot more. So it's brilliant to see how stories help you.
I think it also has to do with the fact that at school you have more the pressure to pass the exams, and then ultimately you go to university after that. So really have that time frame to study and learn everything, and then apply it to an exam. And at university, I mean, you chose what you wanted to study, and you actually enjoy studying that. So I think the mindset is different as well. Also helps.
Yeah.
I think it must be really interesting to look at history through the lens of fashion and how world events affect what people wear, and also vice versa. So, you can imagine in the, I don't know, in the 60s when, there was all the hippies, that was very much reflected in clothing. And as women got more and more rights, they changed how they dressed. And during World War II, when there was rationing, that had a big effect on how people dressed, because they couldn't physically get the materials they could before. So then people invented entirely new ways of replicating similar things. And in the past 2 years, all the kind of the dresses and things that we used to wear to work or going out on a Friday night, no one was buying those anymore. So we were buying, I don't know, luxury pajamas, basically, because that's what everyone was wearing on the bottom half of their suit calls.
Yeah, it changed really drastically. I mean, I studied from 2010 to 2015. So, I mean, from then to now, it's a huge difference. So there are a couple of things that don't apply anymore. So it's really interesting indeed. And when I started studying fashion, I liked watching those movies from, I don't know, that portrayed the 20s, for example. And then I used to kind of try to identify, which time being is that, which decade, because I kind of, it was like a game to me. So I found it really interesting.
Very interesting.
Because you can relate everything through the clothing, through the facts that happened at the time being, and political, social, economical factors that kind of impacted in clothing. So it was really, really interesting.
Talking about this, actually, Gary, it reminded me a little bit of your story from last year. This might sound like a tenuous link, but just the reason being of what Olivia was just saying, then in terms of watching a show and then being able to guess the decade, guess the century, guess the time. Something which I found really inspiring and brilliant about your writing last year was the way that you managed to set the scene. And so without necessarily giving away a year, it wasn't just the clothing you were talking about, but I mean, you could explain it better. It was your story.
It was sort of like, setting the scene for how things were in this particular part of the world in the late 70s, the late 1970s. So, I mean, internationally, things have been very different, but it was very different in a little village in Devon to it would have been in London at the same time, so I know what you mean, and that's interesting. What is it, Aliva?
Aliva, yeah.
Aliva, what you just said about what you said about guessing the decade, because in a local magazine there were some old photos that had been given to them, but there was no detail about them. So, but there were like people stood in front of buildings that are still there now, but you could, like, there was a couple stood in front of a car, so you could see that, like, okay, that car looks like it's from around about 1910, but the clothes are older. So you use like sort of like detective work of like, well, they're dressed in clothes that are later than that, but they've got an old car, and it was like you could see that they're sort of like 20s clothing, and that's all you've got to go on. So it's interesting. I love stuff like that. That's when history's alive. It's about people.
I think as well, what you can do when you have that little amount of information, depending on what purpose you're using it for, is you can actually make up stories off the back of it too. I find it inspiring when you, as you say, so you might have a clothing which is 20 years after the car that you see in a photo, and the old cliche of a picture paints 1,000 words. But as much as that's true to an extent, what I like behind the idea of those 1,000 words, that's obviously more, is that they're different for everyone. So the whole idea of a picture paints 1,000 words, and you see a picture and you've only got those few things to go on, but then you can create your own story based on what you're seeing, and that story will be different to the story that Karima would create, and the story that Aliva would create, and the story that you would create. And that's something special as well. I think the inspiration of seeing different timelines and digging in and working things out.
That was true. I mean, I did actually think, like, I was looking at that one picture in particular. I could actually, this is going on till Sunday, isn't it? I think I'll find that picture and post it on the storytelling page, because there's this couple in front of a car, and you could make a whole story about them. Like, they've got this old car, maybe they're traveling and they've got nice clothes because they want to look good for getting work, and or
I like this. You could talk about the idea of where do they park? Do they park far away if they're looking for work, so that they don't have to show their old car?
And is this in the sort of like after the First World War, sort of like poverty before the boom of the 20s? There's loads you can.
Yeah, and all of that from this one photo that's what I love. I think you can get so much from this one photo, or this one object that you see, or this one tangible thing that creates something completely intangible but recognizable. I think
that's beautiful. that's what writers do, isn't it? Like, I remember reading, there's a Stephen King novel that's about 1,000 pages long, and he thought of it when he was just driving in Florida, just saw a kid stood by the side of the road, and just that clicked something, and he got a whole novel out of it. Just the little wisps of ideas that become more.
Yeah.
If you grab them, use them.
Yeah, exactly. I think part of that is actually a learning process as well for people who are wanting to write more and sometimes aren't sure kind of how to get into it. It's sometimes learning to not ignore anything. When you see something, take it on and kind of think about what you think of it. Not what you think everyone else might want to think of it, but what you think of it. And then you can create something off the back of just... I wrote a story recently just because I saw an autumn leaf in the middle of Germany, and suddenly it just sparked a whole set of ideas just from seeing this. Well, it wasn't one autumn leaf, but seeing autumn leaves in Germany and then focusing on this particular leaf. And I think that's the thing, but that's because that's the way my mind works. I suddenly spiraled and all of these ideas came up and I started writing it down. Whereas lots of people, I think, will maybe have the ideas and then go, oh, that was fun, and forget about it. And I think that's maybe sometimes the difference of actually putting that creativity down and kind of trying to hold on to it and work with it.
I think it's about like consciously observing the world, and those small things, you actually notice them. You don't just, you're mindful about what's happening right now and, oh, that's an idea. And then your mind or your subconscious kind of works on it. Yeah. And for different people, that can be different things. So that could be that someone notices something and then they write a story, or maybe a leaver notices something and then is going home and sketching out, a new outfit. It depends what your thing is, but it all comes from observing the world around you. But it's something you have to get into the habit of doing. Otherwise, you're just walking along looking down at your phone, or just thinking about the next meeting that you're going to. You're not really looking at what's happening around you.
I kind of feel guilty about it. I gotta do that more, because I usually think a lot. I look at something and then I think lots of things about it, but then I gotta put it on the paper or on my mobile. I don't know, but it's really good exercise indeed.
Yeah. Don't
feel guilty.
I heard, I can't remember exactly who it was, but I heard an actor talking recently about a screenwriter that they work with, and forgive me, I forget all the names, but they talked about this guy basically goes around writing on scraps of paper, just ideas that he sees, just all day, every day. This is what he does, and he puts them in a drawer in his desk. And then when it's time to write the next movie, he basically gets all the scraps of paper out, dumps them on the desk, and it somehow becomes the next movie. Wow. So there might only be a few scraps of ideas that really, make it, but by going through it, and it's just a process that he's developed, and that's his way of doing it, because in those hundreds of scraps of paper, one or two of them will be the idea, and then it becomes something.
Wow. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it's something that you become, the more you do it, the more you become aware of it, I think. And if you're not used to doing it, the best thing for me is to just start doing it. Like every time you get an idea, like I was carrying a notebook everywhere and just scribble things down, and they might be ideas for cartoons or whatever, but you do it more. The more you do it, the more you do it. It's kind of
start with one thing a day, and then before you know it, it's 10 or 20.
Yeah.
So we've had, I know we've had quite a few really good stories come into us this week. This isn't necessarily you, Garima, sorry, just because you've already read one, but Gary or Aliva, do you have anything you feel like reading to us this evening at all? Any stories that you feel like showing us? There's no pressure if you don't, by the way.
No pressure.
Just wanted to put it out
I'm
there.
just here in front of everyone. That's actually a fable I'd like to share. That's one of my favorites since I was a kid. And it kind of relate to what I went through today with the train. So life as a whole, like don't live on expectations. And I was kind of hoping to arrive here on time. I tend to plan everything on my app with the train app. And I was planning, okay, I'm going to leave at this time and then I'm going to arrive at this time. I'll maybe have a couple of times I could just wander around a few stores in Amsterdam, and then I'll get the train on time, arrive exactly half an hour before the event starts. And it went completely the opposite way. I couldn't get 2 trains because they were all delayed, and I arrived just 10 minutes late. So, I mean, it sounds silly, but something about expectations that I deal with, and I guess lots of people as well. Then maybe you know this fable. It's from La Fontaine. I'm not sure if I said it right. And the milkmaid girl. That's familiar to any of you? No. Oh, good. Let's start. The girl was full of contentment, as it was the first time she was going to the city to sell her cow's milk. She put on her best clothes and set off down the road, balancing the milk can on her head. As she walked, the girl excitedly began to make plans to earn money. Well, I'll sell the milk and buy eggs, a dozen. Then I put the hen to hatch the eggs, and then I get a dozen chicks, which soon they will grow, and I will have beautiful roosters and beautiful hens. I'll sell the roosters and keep the hens because they'll be great for laying eggs. Once again, I put the eggs to hatch, and then I'll have more roosters and hens. I'll sell everything and buy a goat and maybe some sows. If each sow gives me 3 piglets, I sell 2. I keep 1 and the girl was so distracted by her thoughts that she tripped over a rock, lost her balance, and fell. All the milk was spilled on the floor, to the dreamer's desolation. And the eggs, the chicks, the roosters, the hens, the goat, the sows, and the piglets went up in the air. Moral of the story, you shouldn't count on something until you get it. In other words, don't live a life of expectations.
Love it.
When you asked at the beginning if I knew the fable, I didn't realize from the title, but then when you started reading, I have heard that.
They use different titles.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. But it's a brilliant and important story, and I think these fables. We call today Friday Fables, not because we actually had to have fables, by the way, just because of alliteration. But
I kind of like to bring it. I mean, the name Fable brought that something back to me. I was like, okay, what's the name of that fable again? And I thought it was kind of important, just like because it relates so much to me, and I think to everyone I know around me. And I mean, the culture, the work culture, we still live it because. We still live on expectation, we still live on planning, we still live on trying to control everything. And I mean, Corona, the pandemic itself, has taught us a really tough lesson, and that we can plan our things, whatever we want to plan, but the eventualities are going to come and we can't prevent them. So I think this is a fable for life.
It is. Good. Right. Look after your milk.
What did everyone get from that story? Look after your milk.
That's a good one.
They're like it's like Aesop's fables, or the similar a bit to the Just So stories, if I can remember them from my childhood.
Yeah, I love a load of those actually. If we can find them later, there's we probably should have brought this up. There's a friend of ours named Firat he's from Turkey, and he shared an old Turkish fable at the beginning of the week. So I'm going to see if I can find it, and we'll read that out a little bit later as well. In the meantime, I like the idea of keeping the stories flowing. Does anybody else have a story they would like to share at all?
I'm actually thinking now that I'd like to write something about that photo of the couple with the car. I think I might do. I mean, I thought of it when I was looking at the picture, but I think I'm actually, so I do have that story, but it's in my head and it's not actually, it doesn't exist in the real world. But that is you know, when you were talking about that writing that I did last year, it was very personal and kind of sort of based in like memories. And sorry, my dog's jumping on me.
That's all right.
But it was something that I did a while ago that I told you that I've been revisiting, and it's telling a personal story, and it's trying to talk about the same themes that I was talking about there, to do with family and culture and things, but doing it through fiction that is sort of like realism and fantasy, where they sort of like weave in and out of each other. So it's based on one character, but the fantasy part is kind of his sort of inner world, kind of, but told as a so it's like the idea is that you sort of read it and there's like a chapter on that's like about fantasy writing, creating a whole sort of fantasy world, but then the next chapter is him like living in the real world. But there's so as it progresses, they sort of start merging, and so there are creatures from the fantasy world start appearing in the real world and things like that. So that is, but it was such a big thing, and I'd shelved it for ages, and I just went back and I'd look at it, and like you were saying, like I read some of it and I think like, okay, that's good, that's terrible, that's bearable. So I mean, if I could, I mean, I've got quite a lot, but perhaps I could read just a couple of paragraphs of it.
Yeah, of course, please do. Yeah.
Hang on.
Sorry, I maybe should have held back on the spotlight for a second.
That's all right. Yeah. Okay, so this is just one bit I did. There's quite a few pages, but just say if I'll just read it for a couple of minutes then, shall I? Okay. Right. There's no title or anything, no context. I'll just read it. The stranger arrived at the edge of the plains. For some miles now, he had felt the ground beneath him beginning to change. With each passing hour, the uneven rocks and thickets gave way to a smoother terrain. Walking became less arduous. The stranger's left leg was shorter than his right, a punishment from his old life, and his progress prior to reaching the plains had been slow and painful. As he drew closer, the first wisps of perennial ground mist started to coil around the stranger's feet. Days and nights grew less distinct from each other. The sun did not shine during the day, and at night the sky never quite obscured its unmoving banks of grey cloud. The air grew cold and still. This was welcome. Fierce storms had further hindered the stranger in the most recent stage of his journey. These tempests sometimes halted progress for days, in which the stranger cowered beneath makeshift shelters among the rocks. His withered left arm throbbed in these icy rains. For some time now, he'd known his long pilgrimage was ending. Perhaps at some fundamental level beyond the grasp of conscious understanding, he'd always known that this would be the final phase. Now, as he shuffled ever deeper into the quiet, unchanging landscape of the plains, the stranger's heart was heavy. The most difficult and dangerous part of his quest lay ahead. Without it, every mile he had trodden would be without purpose. On he walked. Eventually, there were no more rocks. There was no more of the varied, tenacious plants that had snagged at his ankles. There was only the silent grey sand over which hovered the carpet of mist, disturbed only by the swish and slump of the stranger's feet before settling immediately to its dormant state. Okay, I'll leave that.
I was waiting for the next part now. Yeah, we're hooked already. It's brilliant. It's so immersive, Gary. Every time you write, I feel like I'm there with you.
Because it's actually because I was writing, I suppose it's quite personal things I'm writing about. Just a lot of it, like really heavy stuff, like family dysfunction, mental illness, addiction, blah blah blah, and like I think it's all important stuff to write about. But if I can turn it into it, so this bit that this guy is in is actually a metaphor for depression, really, and lots of other things. So, but yeah, I thought and it also distances me from it a bit, so I can write more freely. Which just sounds a bit of a paradox, but
I think actually it probably distances the reader a little too, which I think is powerful, and helpful, because I think sometimes some of the best, well, I mean, you think of things like the fantasy kind of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, the Harry Potters and all of that kind of stuff. I think part of the reason people love them so much is partly because, they're like silly creatures, and I'm the same, I like elves and elves and hobbits and all of that. But I think it's actually partly because they're able to tap into a much, much deeper message than they might have otherwise been if they just told a real life story of something that's actually happening.
Yeah,
I think the barriers come down when you're reading a little bit. You're less defensive maybe of something that you can take a side on. You're open to more empathetic with actually listening to the different points of view, because they're not in the real world. They're not points of view that you've already made your mind up about, even though actually they kind of are, if that makes sense. So I think that what you're doing works really well, and it's also quite beautiful. So
it was good to revisit it. So I'll just keep doing it.
Please do. You've got one fan anyway. Welcome, Yvette, by the way. I did say a quick hello in the chat, but I thought I should do it in the public realm. It's lovely to have you. I'm not sure if you can hear me, if you've got your, or if you don't have your mic on, but we'll just a quick kind of update of what tonight's all about. It's fairly simple. We are just having a chat and then sharing stories in between. There's nothing more complicated than that. And as you just heard, we had that great story from Gary. We've had a beautiful poem from Garima and an amazing story from Alivri as well so far tonight. And so hopefully we'll have a couple more before we finish.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, so I'm joining from the US, and I'm using someone else's computer, but I'm Sharon Mingo. So I'm glad to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. Which part of the? By the way, I don't know if you're able to, but feel free to turn on your video, or if you'd rather not, you also don't have to.
I want you all to be happy to have me, so that's why I've done my video.
Oh no, we're very happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I know it's unfair. I can see all of you, but you can't really see me.
No problem.
So which part of the US are you from?
I live in Arverne, New York, which is behind JFK Kennedy, if you know that area. Well, maybe not.
Everyone's heard of it.
Yeah. So yeah. And thank you for commenting on my story, Appeal.
Oh,
that's the Sharon. Yes, I'm using someone's computer, so you don't see Sharon Mingo.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. I loved it. And you're welcome for us commenting, but more to the point, thank you for sharing it. And if you feel like it at any point, you don't have to do this right now, but please feel free to read it as well. It was fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. I'll give you a few minutes to absorb that, and you can come back later if you would like to read. But
okay, sure.
In the meantime, does anybody else have another story they'd like to share at all, or we've got a couple that we maybe wouldn't mind sharing ourselves as well. If
I am working on my full-length novel, and
wow.
Yeah. So what happened was that last year when I was in London, I traveled to London in April, and at that time the lockdown started. So I was, stuck there in in London. So through the LinkedIn, I met my writing mentor, you know. So I discussed with her that I was interested in writing a novel, but, you know, I didn't have anybody who would guide me, you know. So she was kind that she accepted me as a mentee, and she, like, you know, told me the steps before the actual writing. So I was able to, well, fulfill all those steps, whatever guidance she sent me, that, you know, do like this, do that, you know. And then last month I actually started writing, you know, the actual novel, you know. And right now I am on chapter 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good going.
Yeah, it's a
It's really good. I have a lot of
adventure novel, you
I
know.
have a lot of chapter 1.
How many chapters do you think you'd have in that novel?
Sorry.
I don't know how the sound is. She said, "How many chapters do you think you'll be writing altogether in a novel once you're finished?"
Yeah,
Yes.
I made a you know, a rough plan, so
Mhm.
it should be around 25.
Mhm.
Okay.
Rough. I mean, it's just a rough plan, you know.
Right.
So
Considering that as you write the novel writes itself. And so you may end up with less chapters or perhaps a bit more. But you just go with the flow, let the characters tell you what it
yeah,
is they want
actually,
to do.
I just feel, you know, just go with the flow. I mean, like as they say that just write. You can make the corrections, do the editing later, but whatever comes to your mind, just write it down, you know, because then at least you have something, you know. And
Well, what you will have to yeah, you write whatever comes to your mind, but it has to tie in with the theme, and you do have to I guess weed out what's not I guess helpful to the novel, and that's where you need a really awesome editor. That's crucial.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so you
completely
can
agree
say
with you there.
you can say I'm just going with the flow. And yesterday when I sat down, I wrote, like yesterday I was on the chapter 5, and I wrote the whole chapter in one sitting, you know. And that one chapter turned out to be 10 pages long.
That's good going. I salute you, Garima. I think I don't know. I know, Gary, you mentioned that's you've written many chapter 1s. If you put them all together, that's a whole book. I know I've started, as everyone knows, I've started writing, but not actually a novel, something slightly different. By the sound of it, Sharon, this seems like maybe this is something you've done.
Well, writing is in my bones. Writing is my passion. I study writing. I have an MFA. But I'm a late bloomer. So
Okay.
yes, writing is totally what it is. I'm intending to now do, for my living and also for fun, for pleasure. Yes. But if you wanted to, I don't have a peel in front of me, but I
Okay.
can read two very, very short poems if you'd like.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay. So I have two poems. I just pulled them out. With Corona, I don't have access to printers, so everything is old. So hopefully this is a good version. And the first one, the title is called Strength. And when I wrote this, I was thinking of my mother. And so here it goes. Strength. She wears scars well. No broken skin is seen. No pus oozes. She is strong and exudes strength. No one can call her leper. She's the rock that everyone sits on, steps on, rubs hard. Yet she never breaks. She smiles and becomes a blacksmith's anvil. Wisdom sparks from her tongue like processed gold, like ornaments transformed from smelt iron. She's poised, a prize from years and pain. Upon her vantage point, she stands erect and is eminent. That's the poem's strength. And then
Just before you go on to the next one, that was brilliant.
oh, I'm sorry. Go on to the
I
next.
said sorry. Just before you go on to the next poem, that was brilliant. Thank you for reading it.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to think when I wrote that. Was it in grad school? I don't even remember, but I know I wrote it, and it's going to be part of my collection. I'm working on actually putting out my first poetry collection of poetry, my first poetry book this year. A great procrastinator. Many writers are.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll read this last poem for you. It's called The Outcast. And I wrote it many years ago, traveling in New York City, sitting on the train. And I think it'll speak for itself. The outcast. The imperfect train becomes his perfect habitat. It moves, thus he moves from place to place. He's a nomad, society's outcast. He hops like a mouse on apprehensive days, resting his back on the steel carriages of trains. His grimy hands relay stories of his perilous years. His whelped lips expose raw flesh cracked open from the pain of being a nobody, knowing nobody, mauled by the inhuman plight that the functional levies. Each day he shuffles a heavy heart, never bothering anyone, only wishing to sleep and permit time to pass. Each time the sun retreats. Like death, he lies motionless on the train, a debased nomad, slighted by this world, careful not to trust this world. My life has worth, is his voiceless cry. I will exist indefinitely until death unites me with the earth. That's it, guys.
Really powerful.
Nice.
Thank you.
Really good.
It reminds me, actually, there was last year somebody who was taking part in this year's storytelling with Buck as well, but last year a lady called Yulia wrote a story, something along the lines of, the title was From the Outside Looking In. That wasn't the exact title, I'm slightly paraphrasing. But the second of the two poems you just read then reminded me of that slightly, I think, because of the idea of it's almost observing someone who is trying just to live their own way, and people will see them in a whole host of different ways and have their own judgments and their minds made up about who they are, and what they are and what they believe, etc. And the way that you described it then shows a sense of kind of empathy as to the idea of what that person might be thinking and what that person believes, and that's the way I saw it anyway. I don't know if that's the way you
You're
meant it.
correct. You're accurate.
Right, okay.
Yes. Yes.
So
Great
really good,
interpretation.
really powerful. Really,
Thank you
really
so
powerful.
much. Thank you.
Yeah, I really liked that. I liked the way that it rhymed, that wasn't kind of immediately obvious, and some of the phrases in there were really good. I'd like to see that again, actually. There was one, a debased nomad. That was a great phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I will let you know the end of the year or mid-year when that book is ready.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Please do. Also, feel free to now that those particular poems are in the public domain, feel free to attach them to Storytelling with Puck, because I'm sure other people would like to read them as well. And as Gary said, sometimes it's nice to. I love hearing the spoken poem, and then I like going back and just kind of reading it 4 or 5 times so I can better understand it. So yeah, that would be amazing if you wouldn't mind.
For sure, I will post it.
Brilliant. Now, I think if it's okay with everyone, I think Cyan would like to read the fable that we talked about earlier from our friend Fidat. It's called The Cauldron That Died.
Nasruddin Hodja, needing a large pot to cook a stew, borrowed his neighbour's copper cauldron, a large pot, then returned it in a timely manner the next day. "What is this?" asked his neighbour upon examining the returned cauldron. "There is a small pot inside my cauldron." "Oh," responded the Hodja, "I forgot to tell you. While the cauldron was in my care, it gave birth to a little one. Because you're the owner of the mother cauldron, it is only right that you should keep its baby. And in any event, it would not be right to separate the child from its mother at such a young age." The neighbour, thinking that the Hodja had gone quite mad, did not argue. The neighbour had a nice little pot and he was happy with the outcome. Sometime later, the Hodja asked to borrow the cauldron again. "Why not? Perhaps there will be another little pot inside when he returns it," thought the neighbour to himself. But this time the Hodja did not return the cauldron. After many days had passed, the neighbour went to the Hodja and asked for the return of the borrowed cauldron. "My dear friend," replied the Hodja, "I forgot to tell you, but I have bad news. Your cauldron has died."
Oh no!
"What are you saying?" shouted the neighbour. "A cauldron does not live, and it cannot die. Return it to me at once." "I'm sorry," answered the Hodja, "but this is the same cauldron that gave birth to a child that is still in your possession. If a cauldron can give birth, then it can also die." And the neighbour had no answer for this. He never again saw his cauldron. Moral of the story: there are many things that we can take from this story, but the main one is that we shouldn't lie our way into tricking others for our personal gain, as it can come back to haunt us.
Oh,
Yes.
oh my goodness. That's
So
great.
apparently this is an old Turkish fable if you go to Firat's post, he explains a little bit more about the background.
Yeah, I think it's a 13th century historical figure he was talking about, not someone that I'd known of until Firat shared this. So he has his particular idea on the moral of the story. Did any of you take anything else from it?
I think along those same lines, but I was really captivated by the humor and just the flow of the story. So my thought though is that that's a story that should be shared with the world, politicians and all, because the moral is something we can all emulate in our lives.
I think so.
Yeah. I think actually, I think somewhere in that post, Firat does mention that when these stories were first being told, the idea behind them was actually to inject a little bit of humor and to share a story that was a little bit light-hearted to get a more serious message across. I think going back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, where we were talking about your story, Gary, and fantasy and being able to use fantasy to get a more important message across than it seems like the story is originally telling. I think Fables actually do that spectacularly well. That's the idea behind them. It's let's put yourselves into a little scenario which maybe doesn't make any sense at all, like a cauldron giving birth and a cauldron dying. But actually, if you really read that back a few times, what does it tell you and what does it mean to you, and kind of what's the idea and the moral behind it, I think.
And it shows as well that considering how old it is. Oh, sorry, I've just seen Garima needs to go.
Yeah, me too. No,
Oh, yeah,
no
it's-
worries, Garima. Thank you very much for coming along and joining
Yeah.
us and reading.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's it. Gone. So sorry, Gary. Go on.
All right, just that's 13th century, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
So it sort of it shows as well that in terms of like understanding morality and intellectual abilities and the ability to create human things is how close that is to us now, that whatever the way we live, how much that changes and technology and everything, but people are basically still the same and just telling stories to try and get a moral point across.
That's so true.
Yeah, I think
But
that's
you-
true. I think. Sorry, go on, Sharon.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it hits the nail on the head. And I believe fiction and poetry, whatever it is, should really be sort of like fables. And a lot of times they're really truth and reality that we embellish. I do that a lot. Appeal is an embellished reality. It's a real story that happened actually. And so not that we're trying to preach to people, but I think readers do learn a lot from our stories, our art when they read it. So I am in love with fables, and I think I want to probably try to write a few and add to my book in poetry form.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think fables are important. I also, to slightly counteract that, I do think that from a writer's perspective, we don't, if we're writing fiction, we don't necessarily need to have, I guess, maybe the pressure or thinking that we need to have some deep meaning behind what we're doing, or we need to have some moral or some link to the real world behind what we're doing. It may turn out that way. But actually, I think for the freedom of creativity, sometimes, at least at the beginning of a story, I write purely because I want to write nonsense, and it is truly nonsense. And then sometimes by the end of it, I go, oh, actually, I was trying to make a point there that I didn't even realize I was trying to make. And sometimes it's just nonsense. And so, but I think that they're both okay, because nonsense can also just have a degree of fun. And when people are writing and reading it, it just kind of makes you feel a bit warmer and kind of more, I guess, engaged in the day sometimes, just reading complete and utter tripe.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And because you give yourself that liberty and freedom to write what you consider as nonsense, it does have a moral, because the writer, the author is real, and we can't help but present realness in our fiction and the nonsense that we write. And so they're almost like fables, whereby people laugh at the characters, but they learn a lot. So go ahead and no, I don't want to embarrass myself, but you are Puck, right?
Yeah. So,
Okay. I want to make sure.
Cyan and I are Puck creations.
Okay, yeah. So so I would say in all the books that I will ever write, even though I fictionalize them, a lot of them really are reality, but I have so much fun with them, you know. So I totally agree with you, though. We have to free ourselves so that we can enjoy the writing, and in turn, viewers can enjoy what it is we're writing. So yeah.
Yeah, for definite.
I promise you, I feel guilty. Yes. So I promise you that, I don't know, you have a day or two more with this series. I promise you, I will look presentable, so that I can join and be seen, and I probably will read a peel or something, so you can, if there is another chance to read.
Yes.
There is actually, you've I think if I go to an American term, you've thrown the ball. So I know nothing about baseball, as you can hear, but I'm going to bat it out of the court. I think that's what you say.
What did
I'll
I
stop now. No, but you led me to talking about there is one more Zoom call. It's going to be on Sunday, and that's going to wrap up the week. It is at
6 p.m. UK time. I don't know what time that is in New York.
So that's probably
Early
1
afternoon,
p.m.
yes.
That's in the day. That's
Yeah.
perfect. That's middle of day. And I promise you, I will wake early because I usually write and work late into the Sunday morning. But I'll get up early and I'll make myself presentable and I can read a piece or something. But at least you'll have a face behind the voice.
Perfect.
Sounds
That
good.
sounds good to me. That does sound good. Okay, so we haven't got too much time left. So would anybody else like to read something else, or does anybody kind of want to have a focus of discussion of any of the other areas that we've been talking about that you urgently need to get out there?
I'm good. I'm going to post some more to the hashtag though. I'm going to put the rest of that writing, and I'd like to play around with that idea from that photo for Sunday.
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I'm quite excited by it. you now have, I've commissioned you to, to write it.
So a pound a word.
Well, I've commissioned you, but I've heard that Alivri is paying, so she's good like that. So yeah. Okay, so if nobody else has any stories they want to read right now, like I said, we will be back on Sunday to have a goodbye Zoom, and we'll make sure that we get lots of stories in there as well. So I hope that you guys can make it, and anybody who's currently watching on YouTube, you can either come back and watch on YouTube, or you can actually join the Zoom next time as well. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and thank you for reading the stories and for chatting, and as always making us think and feel something, which is the whole point of what we all do, I believe.
Thank you. This was totally awesome. I enjoy this chat. So I look forward to being participating on Sunday.
I'll bring the wine.
Yeah.
Yes, that sounds good. We'll do a cheers. This time it's just with water, but we'll have wine and beer.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We will, as always, finish with a story. But thank you very much, guys. Until Sunday, take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
It was Friday, dark and late. I was exhausted and refused to believe him. But his words hit me like a hurricane. I can still hear them now, echoing through time. Deep down, my instincts screamed out. He was onto something big, a theory so cunning, yet simple, profound, penetrating even. His hands gripped my coat tight as he pulled me towards him. He opened his mouth, hesitated, and snapped it shut again. And then he whispered, always start with a hook, reel them in with a dirt cheap metaphor, make one sentence lead to another.
Yeah.
We heard footsteps. He turned to run, but before he did so, he glanced back one last time and in a low voice uttered, and remember, you must always end on a clip high.
Oh.
That's by our friend Eleanor Gold. Thank you very much for that, Eleanor.
Take care, guys. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye. It was a pleasure.